بمديح الهادي تنتظم، ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to Finding Me today on the ITV networks with a dynamic and I think a very intriguing guest from Palestine, Birzeit University, the director of the Mawatin Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. With me is Professor Mudar Kassis. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome, Professor.
Ahlan fiki.
It's wonderful to have you here, and it was interesting to have this quick discussion with you about the genealogy of names. And I think with the genealogy of names, one also takes into consideration ontology and epistemology, and that is your focus. So I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation today because of the challenges that the Palestinians face, and I think in many ways they're a similar kind of a challenge that South Africans face, in the whole sense of the dehumanization of the black body in South Africa and the dehumanization of the Palestinian individual in Palestine. At the same time, the erasure of both the black history, the black ontology, the black epistemology, and the process is ongoing, of course, in Palestine. So is this perhaps what spurred you on to be the epistemologist that you are?
Not really, not really. You know, people develop. Now I'm 55, and by the time I decided to be an epistemologist, I was 25.
Okay.
So that was quite a while ago. But nonetheless, I would rather think of the questions of epistemology not in terms of race or color, but rather in terms of class and social positioning and social status. There is, of course, you know, there are always at least two epistemologies, always. And I would rather think of the colonial versus the anti-colonial epistemology, whether it's black, whether it's white, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Christian, it doesn't matter. There are those who are oppressed, and epistemology is actually enforced on them. Most of the process of oppressing people, whether it's slavery or colonialism or anything in between, is actually uses very significant and strict epistemologic techniques to control those who are oppressed, to control those who are hegemonized. So there is a hegemonic and a hegemonized epistemology. I would put it in these broader terms, and I think this is useful in order for us to actually see the connection between most probably of the issues that we face on the planet Earth. So I mean, I don't see the Palestinians as accidentally similar to black Africans or to any majority or minority that has been oppressed throughout the history. I think there's a history of oppression, there's the history of hegemony, and probably what we should hope to reintroduce against the current epistemology, against the current prevalent neoliberal epistemology, is to reintroduce the notion of class, as a matter of fact.
But there are others who would disagree with you to say that if you're looking only at class and not looking at race, and race would be a primary marker of this kind of oppression. By focusing only on class, aren't you limiting perhaps the scope? Because if you look at, for instance, if you look at amongst white people, right, there are different classes amongst themselves, but you would not find the level of oppression in their classes as you would find amongst the black whites on black lower classes. So race, the way in which the oppression manifests actually stems from more than just class. It stems perhaps in the way in which racism is defined, and that would be the way in which the human is viewed. You know, as Fanon says, or it's a power structure based on the inferiority and superiority of a human being along this particular line. So it's more than class.
Probably, definitely it is. I mean, there are so many different definitions that one can find for themselves, and actually one of the current neoliberal techniques is to find so many identities for each of us, so that we all actually eventually become minorities,
yes.
Seeking some sort of protection, etc. I mean, just to be sure, I did not say that it is only class. But we need to have some generic starting point to enable us to indulge into some sort of deconstruction. So let me give an example. I mean, why would somebody care about being black or see ourselves as black? I mean, why do we need to really see ourselves in that matter? I mean, I would love to see myself as a philosopher, a blacksmith. I would probably like to see myself as a father or as a child. I would like to see myself as somebody who loves literature. I would like to see myself as somebody who enjoys singing. I mean, there are so many different things that we can, and for some reason, we are actually forced into a corner where we define ourselves as black. But you know, this is not our definition.
Yes.
We were defined as blacks. And one of the ways to actually resist the situation is to resist our own, that definition that has been imposed on us, and not to adopt it, and not to come up with this notion of I accept my blackness. Of course, you know, I shouldn't be thinking of my color. I mean, why is color an issue? Who made it an issue in the first place? And so if it was not me who made my color an issue, then probably I shouldn't be defining myself in that particular manner. Color is only one example. Ethnicity is probably the same. Religion is also a question of. Well, most of the people in this world do not choose their religion willingly. You know, we are born this way or that way, and I think that we should really try to define ourselves in terms that we choose, define ourselves in according to our will and not according to our genes, because if we do accept the genetic definition, then we also become racist. No?
I would disagree with that, but I'm not going to get into that particular discussion. However, I do want to interrogate your explanation further, because you said that we should define ourselves according to how we want to be and not be entrapped in the definition that's imposed upon us. But then right at the start, you spoke about hegemonic order, the hegemonizer and those, you know, who control the hegemonic debate or the discussion. Irrespective of whether I want to define myself the way I want to, being non-white, that means being black, my understanding of myself will still not gain that legitimacy, will not gain that traction, nor will it gain that voice, because I am not the hegemony or the hegemonic voice. So we will be pushing basically from a position of inferiority, or shall I say, from a position of defense and not from a position of power. So how does that change anything, rather than to accept that, you know, yes, there is this concept that has been created, but now how do we then manage this? But more importantly, how do we attribute a positive, turn it around, turn it on its head, as the, you know, the epistemology or the etymology, sorry, of radical means, you know, to turn something on its head, turn blackness on its head, and instead of treating it as an inferiority or as a weaker concept, or you know, at this opposition between inferiority, superiority, or violence versus civilized, etc., turn it on its head and make it a more positive concept. But the fact of the matter is, yes, we're defined as black, we exist as.
We don't have to accept that.
Yes, I know.
We don't have to. The thing is, I mean, you started this discussion with the notion of epistemology. So let's go back to see, you know, epistemologically, what does this hegemony really mean? Part of this epistemology is the notion that we should accept power relations. Yes. Part of this hegemony is the notion that we should accept that there are the powerful and the powerless. And if we accept this, then the utmost that we can dream of is to flip the hegemonic relation, to become the hegemons. But then we will become as bad as our hegemonizers. So flipping things doesn't solve the problem. What we need to do is to completely dismantle this type of relations. And in order to dismantle them, we cannot accept the basis on which these power relations are set. We have to dismantle the basis of these relations, and not only to look at them from the other side or flip the coin, so to speak, in that manner. The reasons of why the powerful are powerful, whatever made them powerful at a certain point, is what we have to seek to dismantle. I don't think that the solution is for the hegemonized to go and step into the place of the hegemonizer. As a matter of fact, if you look at the liberation struggles over the past 5-6 decades, and if you look at how many people have suffered, how much blood was, how many lives were designated for liberation, and if you look at the lives of those nations who have put this whole price, and find out that they are not really way better off, and that they are not really liberated, they are not emancipated, you will find out that the formula that we have been engaged in was not probably the right formula, and the formula was actually set in the manner that you are describing. I think people misread Fanon. I think people, it's okay. Let me shift to another completely example. But somebody has found out that absolutely most of those, for example, who quote Adam Smith, read the first 3 pages. They
Okay. Yeah.
And they never read on because what they quote, is the superficial part of say Adam Smith. And I think that to a great extent, not to the extent of the only first 3 pages, but to a great extent, we also misread Fanon. Fanon describes the inevitability of the struggle and of the power relations the way they are, and of the revengist nature. But he also says,
To find a better human, yes.
yeah, but he also says, which people keep forgetting, that to be revengist is not liberatory.
Yes,
it will not liberate us.
Yes, yes.
So, if you only want to flip the coin, if you accept, for example, the colonial relation, and you just want to be the colonizer rather than the colonized, if you want to just flip these relations, I don't think that that the humanity will be moving ahead.
Okay, I have to stop you there because you're going to a break, but I like what you've been raising, and that is that to be careful not to become the beast that your oppressor was. That's a very important narrative to bear in mind when we think about changing the colonial relations in which we are trapped both in our mind and in our physical beings. But we'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment today on Finding Me in the ITV networks with my very special guest, Professor Mudar Kassis, and he's from Birzeit University. We're talking about decoloniality, epistemology, the kinds of discussions that we've been having since 2015 in conjunction with the Feast Must Fall movement. The whole idea of why we need to change the way in which knowledge is presented and knowledge production. But I think what is important is to go back to the very idea that Professor Kassis was mentioning just before we went on to the break, and that is about imagining ourselves to be a better human, to not be the beast that our oppressor was in that search for our liberation, because it's not only about freedom, it's about liberation too, and in asserting our humanity, we should not lose ourselves. So Professor Kassis, coming back to what you were saying and this redefining or understanding ourselves through the epistemology, you said that it's a path that we need to pay for ourselves, but it takes a lot of work. Can you explain a little on that?
Yes, I mean, but there are several levels of a possible explanation. The simplest one is that the colonial relation is a relation. So the colonizer is also not free, really. The hegemonizer, they have their hands busy hegemonizing, and they're not free to use them the way they like, because they have to keep controlling us. And so, so simply speaking, even if we manage to flip this relation, we will not really become free, because we will have to take the exact role of the hegemonizer, and we will be again part of instead of being stolen, we will be stealing, but the theft process will keep on going. That's the first, probably most important and simplest part of the story. The other part is that there is a relation between coloniality and capitalism. Coloniality has emerged as part of the capitalist endeavor, and it's not going to last forever. And we have to seek, and we have to have a duty, as a matter of fact, to look into the future of humanity altogether. We should not accept the notion that we are recipients of whatever they design for us. We have to be designing the future. And in designing the future, we should not exactly take the same techniques and methodologies that the hegemonizer is taking. We should seek those techniques and methodologies that we perceive as better for us. And us can be us segregated as the hegemonizer segregated us. So when we are seeking ways towards our future, we probably need to consider a situation whereby this myself and the other dichotomy that has been colonially imposed on us simply taken away. We should be seeking a rebuilding of history. We should be seeking a rebuilding of history that is in the future. We should be seeking it in a manner that meets our dreams, and probably our dreams should not necessarily have, foes and enemies in it. We can imagine. I'm not saying that this will really happen, but we can start with a dream whereby we invite everybody to join us for a better future.
So I'm going to stop you again there, because listening to me, it's like I'll say, it's the philosopher philosophizing, but it's not the reality that we find ourselves in, because the biggest challenge is the fact that we have been all raised and educated and basically almost controlled through a colonial epistemology. And so Audre Lorde said that how do you rebuild using the master's tools? So basically the first process to reimagine this is to come out of that colonized thinking. And that is difficult for as long as the systems don't change, because you're trying to break a mold, but at any point you're going to be trapped into that way of thinking.
No, you don't have to be trapped. Now, first of all, let's go back to this idiom that you are using. What we agree on, I suspect everybody agrees on, is we do have to dismantle the master's house. But I do not agree that we cannot use the master's tools. I think those tools were actually produced by us. They are ours, and we should use them. What we shouldn't use are the master's techniques as the master's methods. But the tools are pretty much the same. The tools are predominantly us. The tools are things of our production.
Knowledge
the tools
production.
are the wealth that humanity has, that we sweated in creating. And the question is not about the wealth. The question is about its distribution. We don't want to dismantle the wealth of the world. We don't want to dismantle civilization. We don't want to dismantle all the achievements of humanity, whether it's technology, whether it's literature, whether it's art. We should admire that, but we should have it equally for all, and probably we should not try to repeat the situation that we are currently in, whereby most of the world's wealth is exclusively used by a very short and small
1%,
segment.
yeah.
By those 1% or 10%, whatever you want. I mean, there are different figures depending on how much wealth you are looking, but we should really realize that this wealth does belong to us, and we don't want to throw it away.
But by wealth, you're not only talking about material wealth, you're talking about knowledge, about culture, about tradition,
Exactly.
all of those things.
Whatever humanity has managed to produce through labor, through all the efforts that humanity has put in thousands of years to make the world as wealthy as it is today. I mean, look at us, we overeat as a humanity. And the question is, there is no convincing answer of why there are people who live in hunger. There is enough food for everybody. There's enough shelter for everybody. There's enough technology for everybody. There's enough communication to cover everybody. And the question really is a question of bad distribution.
And so we have to address that bad distribution. And the starting point, would you say then, is through epistemology, through knowledge production, through changing the way in which we think, through changing the way in which we teach, and through changing the way in which we learn, to question the concepts, to question the ideas, to question the power relations?
Yes, but most importantly, to change the way we act. You know, thinking is great.
I agree with that. Okay.
Thinking is great, but the eventual aspect, the eventual thing that will create change is our action. Thinking is not sufficient. Asking questions is very important, but answers are also important. We have to find our own answers to our own questions, not our answers to their questions. Yeah? And not to just ask other questions. We have to put new questions and new answers. And that's the only way that you can change the whole system and not stay hostage to the existing system. That's actually an old difference, which is coming back to the current debate, whereby when I remember when I was younger, in the 70s and probably the 80s also, there was a huge debate about reform and revolution and whether reform can be sufficient to change things enough. And actually, the whole difference between those two, revolution, you know, revolution is bloody, always bloody, and I would love if we could avoid it in a way. Unfortunately, it is imposed on us in the sense that the system does not allow for sufficient reform to free the people. And so, you know, falling into the traps of the system, accepting as a given anything out of that system, first of all, will not serve the cause of changing the way we live, changing the set of relations that we have, overcoming power relations. And secondly, I have to note that belonging to the system is unethical. It is unethical because the system is so unethical. Accepting the status quo means, epistemologically, for example, it means a complete division between theory and practice, a complete division between our ideas and our actions. For the hegemonizers, this is very convenient. They do not have to explain how their acts of hegemony fit with the ideals that they read about or talk about. So they divide the world into two worlds, the world of ideas and the world of acts. And they are sort of two independent worlds, and it's very convenient for them. For us, if we accept this, it means that we cannot dream. It means that we have to accept their dreams for us. And this is it shouldn't be acceptable.
This reminds me of a very powerful comment that I think Professor Nelson Maldonado Torres even made about the suspension of ethics, you know, where ethics is suspended. And then at that point, you find that the other is in this kind of a limbo, always having to dream their dreams, because the hegemonizer, as you say, is the one who is imposing upon the condition in which they find themselves. And I think you raise also in this very poignant discussion that you just brought about now, you bring forth the whole idea of an ethical human being, and that is the struggle that we should be engaging within ourselves, because in being an ethical human being, you measure not only your thoughts but your actions as well.
Of course, and the compatibility of both. These are not two worlds, really. We live one life. It is one world, and our ideas and our actions have to be compatible. What is frightening is actually that we nowadays belong to a generation which is a consumer of neoliberal dreams. We stopped creating our own dreams. We find them, you know, we go window shopping for dreams, sort of thing. You look at people, and their dream today is to maybe become middle class rather than abolish the classes. The dream is to be able to go abroad rather than fix your own country. The dream is to eat more junk food rather than to learn cooking.
I understand.
You
I
see,
get that.
I mean,
Yes,
you can see it happening almost in every aspect of our lives,
but
where
that's
we are
because-
becoming consumers of even dreams.
Yeah, well, that's where the individual has been commodified in their own way as well. But we're at the end. We're coming back with the second interview. I'd like you to leave us in 30 seconds with a parting comment.
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be talking to you and to your audience. And secondly, I really do wish that we start thinking of our struggles, our causes, and our issues as global and not as local, because they have been actually localized by our enemies, and we shouldn't accept this localization.
And I think in unity we find strength, and there's power in solidarity, right?
Solidarity is very important, and more importantly, we should not succumb, because part of this localization of our issues is actually the good old colonial technique of divide and rule.
But we'll come back, we'll talk about this further. We'll see you next week when I raise the questions about human rights with Professor Mudar Kassis from the Mawatin Institute, that's at Birzeit University, Palestine. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت